Blessings, beloveds. Welcome back. Anastasia, Cosmic Astrologer. Going to do a part 2 on the incredible Novak Djokovic. So I did a part 1 just recently, and so it's actually right at the top of the list of videos. So I would encourage you to go back to that if you haven't seen it, because this is an extension to that. I've actually discovered some further things which are going to really blow your mind. And a lot of it is very technical, so I will just try and keep it very, very simple in terms of explaining it all. But before I go there, I just want to say, first of all, I hope you're all doing well wherever you are in the world. Hope you are safe, healthy, and well, and living, in your true authenticity and truth, whatever that is for you. We've actually got a lot of protests here today in every state of Australia, so it's wonderful to see people still standing up for their sovereignty and freedom and rights. And there's certainly massive revolutions happening collectively, really. I mean, I heard the changes in the UK, changes in Israel, changes in America, all positive ones, of course, and it's all happening around the time of the sun ingressing into Aquarius, which is quite interesting, isn't it? I'm going to come back and talk about the sun's ingress into Aquarius, and certainly I want to talk about the transition of the nodes moving into Taurus and Scorpio. That's a huge, evolutionary shift for the world and for all of us personally, depending on where those nodes are in our charts. There's a lot to say about the transition of those nodes, and I will come back and talk about all of that soon. But I couldn't help and get on today to really show you guys, again, just the magic and power of astrology, particularly from the point of view of timing and technicalities, right? And so working with astrology at a very deep level is working with astrology as though you are a craftsman. It's there's different levels of astrology, of course, and there's different levels that appeal to different people, absolutely. But in my experience, the more you practice with astrology and the deeper you go and the deeper your exploration goes, the more you learn, the more you discover, and the more you realize that there's this magical divine timing in everything that takes place. And the symbolism and language of astrology has the power to identify that in ways that I don't think any other wisdom can, quite frankly. That's from my perspective. So, as I said, I would certainly watch the video prior to this one to get the information that I gave previously, because today we're going to look at a couple of different things. So let me just start by sharing my screen. Wonder how you're all doing with Mercury retrograde, by the way. It's been playing quite a lot of tricks with me. Okay, I'll leave that there for now. Loads of technological issues for sure. Phone, computer, it's just been, the typical things that Mercury retrograde can spit out. But on the other hand, there's been a lot of, for me personally, there's been a lot of beautiful new discoveries and processes of new things that I'm wanting to begin in my own life as well. It's just been very, very interesting. So I wonder how that is all going for you guys. Okay, so first of all, I have actually rectified Novak's chart. So the time given originally is 11:25 a.m. and the rectified time is p.m. rather. The rectified time is 11:09 p.m. Now you can take that time and work with it if you wish. If you don't, and you want to work with the time given, that's entirely up to you. But this is the rectified time. Most of you are aware that I rectify charts. Sorry, I'm just trying to shrink that a bit. There we go. So rectification is not an easy process. Many astrologers don't do it. I can completely understand why. I actually do it with my mentor, so I don't do it completely alone. It is a fickle sort of process, and it is a skill. It is a craft, and it takes time. But it's worth learning. It's worth learning because you will find yourself, when you've got an accurate birth time, then the timing of everything that occurs in your life is pristine, bang on, 100% correct. That's the value of rectification. So we've talked a little bit about his natal chart in the first video. We've talked about some of the transits and things that are going on in his chart relative to the events that had occurred whilst he was here in Melbourne, Australia, which most of you now would know that, unfortunately, the second court case that took place, it was decided that he would be deported. Thus, the Australian government and laws here, they are extremely regimented, extremely strict. But regardless of that, we can actually see what took place by looking at Novak's natal chart, secondary progressed chart, and transits. So I don't want to repeat what I did in video number 1, so please go and watch that. So what I've done today is I've looked at his whole sign houses. And if you guys remember, I talked about there's an asteroid called Melbourne, which is extremely prominent in Novak's chart. And this whole event took place in Melbourne. That's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence to be born, with the name of an asteroid in a city where you have this life-altering event take place. That's not a coincidence. So the asteroid Melbourne is conjunct his natal Mercury. Okay, just his natal Mercury is there at 18 degrees of Gemini, and natally the asteroid Melbourne is right there on his Mercury. That's one thing. It's obviously opposite the Saturn-Uranus conjunction in his chart. So again, I don't want to repeat what I've previously talked about. So I'll just move on from that and actually show you the new findings for today, which are absolutely fascinating. So first of all, what I'm bringing up here is not that one. Whole sign houses, where is it? There we go. So this is Novak's chart with whole sign houses. Most of you are aware of this system. For those of you that are not, it's just a different house system. It's one of the oldest and most traditional house systems that actually is incredibly powerful. I personally work both with whole sign houses and quadrant. So when I look at your chart, I will work with both levels because both levels are equally important, if you like, and both have different things to show us, okay? So in the case of Novak's chart, pay attention to the descendant, which is at 0 degrees of Cancer, and there's Mars, of course, right on that descendant. So first of all, as I mentioned in the previous video, he's coming up to a new secondary progressed new moon cycle. That progressed new moon cycle is a 30-year cycle. I talked about that in the previous video. I talked about the Sabian symbol, so I won't unpack that again today, but it is important just to bring it back in reference to the few layers I'm going to share with you today. So before I go to the moon, let me just say this, that the asteroid Melbourne, which is conjunct his natal Mercury, has, over the course of his life relative to secondary progressions, it has progressed to, at the moment when he was here in Melbourne, the actual Melbourne asteroid has progressed to 1 degrees of Cancer. Now, when you look at his 7th house and his Mars, you can obviously see that what's happened is the Melbourne asteroid via secondary progressions has progressed to hitting off his 7th house and Mars. I mean, that within itself is just phenomenal in the literal description of what is actually what actually took place here. First of all, Mars rules sportsman. Second of all, Mars rules your opponent, conflict, competition, etc. When you find Mars on the 7th house, that is the point of who is opposing you, as it were, right? So the Mars energy in the 7th house connects to conflict, battles, competition, fighting, etc. And so it's not a coincidence that when Novak was here in Melbourne at that time, that the events that took place, which is he had to fight for his ability to stay here. You know, he had to activate that Mars, okay? But the Mars was coming at him from out there as well, because the seventh house corresponds to what's considered in traditional astrology as open enemies. It's called open enemies because you can see who your opponent is. Hidden enemies belong in the 12th house because you can't see who your enemies are, right? That's a whole other thing. But you just need to know that the 7th house corresponds to battle and challenge and competition, etc. So here we have, you know, in whole sign houses, what happens is the secondary progressed Melbourne asteroid comes to activate his 7th house, okay? It activates the Mars, so that's one level. The secondary progressed moon, which is a new moon cycle that starts off a 30-year cycle, it takes place in a couple of months' time, right? Less than a couple of months. So we're, you know, approaching that stage. But when he was here in Melbourne, the secondary progressed moon, it hasn't quite gotten to be the new moon yet. It's actually at 1 degree of Cancer. Okay, so again, what we're seeing is this is another layer with another technique. We're seeing that the secondary progressed moon in Novak's chart at the time when these events took place was at 1 degree of Cancer, meaning it was right on his Mars and right on the descendant. This is powerful, powerful shit. It's powerful. Now, the thing that I want to explain, actually, I'll go there in a minute. One other thing that's very well worth noting as well is that the transiting asteroid Melbourne, so we've got 3 layers of the Melbourne asteroid being activated in Novak's chart at the time of the events that took place in Melbourne, Australia, which was just a week ago, right? So we've got the secondary progressed transit of the Melbourne asteroid. We've got the secondary, let me start that again. Secondary progressed asteroid of Melbourne being at 1 degree of Cancer. We've got the transiting asteroid, which actually was sitting at 0 degrees of Sag. So imagine secondary progressed asteroid reaches 1 degree of Cancer, activates the Mars, activates the 7th house, all at the time when he was here. The transiting Melbourne asteroid was at 0 degrees of Sag at the time that Novak was here in Melbourne, Australia. Why is that significant? 2 reasons, 2 very specific reasons. First of all, it's opposite his sun in Gemini. And secondly, it happens to be at the midpoint of Saturn midheaven. That is that the 0 degrees Sag happens to sit on the midpoint of Saturn midheaven. Why is that significant? Clearly because the Melbourne asteroid is so significant for him in his life as reflected through his chart, number one. Number two, the midpoint of midheaven and Saturn is a very important midpoint because it clearly speaks to your public self, public persona, professional identity. We're talking about the 10th house now. And Saturn, which can speak to those things as well, but in this case, it more has reflected the restriction, suppression, separation, which is what happened. He was separated from Melbourne, Australia. He was deported. So you've got, multiple things being activated all at the exact same time. This is the magic and the wisdom of astrology from a technical perspective. These are the layers that are buried underneath the things that you see on the surface. A lot of it, which is fairly superficial to some extent when you're talking about popular astrology. This is not popular astrology, so it's not going to appeal to many people because they won't get their head around it. That's fine. But I know there are many of you that do appreciate this, and this is why I'm sharing it. Okay, so I just want to also tell you that Saturn midheaven combination, there's several comments here, but I'm just going to read one comment. The necessity to struggle against difficulties or odds, the act of separation, difficulties in one's career and occupation. So there it is. Okay, I mean, it couldn't be articulated more clearly than that. That comes from Reinhold Eberton. That's cosmobiology midpoints. And I now would just read from Rob Hand's book, Horoscope Symbols, in terms of what he describes about Saturn in the midheaven. Okay. One's own uniqueness, to have a strong sense of who one is, to have a precisely defined sense of direction in life, difficulty in compromising one's own ideas and ideals, alienation and loneliness to feel or be very different from others, to want to be alone. So the key words in that, really relative to these events specifically, is really about strong sense of who he is, which he has a very strong sense of his own identity. He stood for what he believed in. And it does actually talk in this comment that I just read, it describes an individual who has that kind of character, right? And who does not compromise his ideals and ideas. And that's exactly what Novak did. He did not compromise on his beliefs, which is he believes, as far as I understand, that he does not need to succumb to some kind of experimental process that's being delivered collectively, right? So there it is. Okay, so you've got whole sign houses, this is why it's important to check out your whole sign houses chart, as well as it is important to check out your quadrant house chart, right? So whole sign houses, Mars on the descendant, this is just his natal chart as read through whole sign houses. But the interesting thing is that the secondary progressed moon activates that seventh house, that Mars, okay? The transiting asteroid Melbourne at 0 degrees of Sag activates the sun. It's right opposite the sun. It's right at the midpoint of Saturn midheaven. The symbolism couldn't be more clear and more literal. Now, I want to show you guys something else that's really interesting. Just another layer. This is relative to solar returns and lunar returns. And this is something that I have never considered before, but myself and my mentor were having a discussion with it today. And given the way it showed up in Novak's chart, it's certainly worth considering. So let me see, where is the solar return? Okay. So with solar return charts, the general premise is that you draw a solar return chart for where you are on that day. So that would then imply if you were born in Serbia and were in Spain, for instance, you would do the solar return chart for Spain. That's a debatable theory, and that's something that you need to work out yourself. And the way you work things out is you research and you study chart after chart after chart. You never know the answer necessarily, in definitive terms about principles and techniques unless you work with chart after chart after chart. You have to be able to see some trend following. You have to see a consistency, right, in order to validate the theory, let's say. So that being said, this is Novak's solar return chart for Serbia. I don't know if he was in Serbia for his solar return, but he might have been. That factor we don't know, but we'll just assume that he was for the purposes of this demonstration. So have a look at his solar return chart. Pluto right on the midheaven. That's, you don't necessarily have a solar return where Pluto is going to be right on your midheaven. It's not necessarily the case, right? And so this is how it shows up in his solar return chart for the solar return that he is in at the time when these events took place. So this is yet another layer showing us the symbolism to the events that took place. Pluto is about power, autonomy, power struggles, authority, power struggles with powerful forces, etc., etc. It's on the midheaven. Obviously, it's got to do with his public persona, profession, career, what he's standing for, etc. So he's got a lot of things activating his chart that were not necessarily going to be, a breeze and a walk in the park. And it obviously wasn't, because in the end he was deported, right? The other interesting thing, this is where you can think about solar return chart and thinking about lunar returns within that solar return chart. So you'd have a lunar return, as it were, every month, right? Now, if you think about the date, now I've got the date here as well. This is his solar return as of 22nd of May 2021, which means that's the solar return that covers him from then until May this year. Okay, so when he was here in Melbourne, it was in January, right? So clearly he's within that solar return period. A solar return lasts for 12 months, right? So in this solar return period, at the time where he was here in Melbourne and the final result was delivered relative to his deportation, it happened just around about when the full moon occurred in Capricorn, Cancer rather. So the full moon was actually on this axis. It was on the axis of Capricorn and Cancer. Okay, so therefore activating in his solar return chart the MCIC axis with Pluto on the midheaven. So there's just another layer of a far quicker movement relative to a full moon, for instance, or the moon period, right? It's just showing us another level of things being activated, pointing to the symbolism of what happened to him here in this country, in this state, is reflected through a number of different levels with astrological principles and techniques. And this is yet just another one. So let me see if I've left anything out. Okay, no, I haven't. So those are the main things that I wanted to highlight today. These were not included in the first video because these are just recent discoveries, as in the last couple of days. And I mean, frankly, the example of Novak and what happened to him, the example of the astrology that I've demonstrated through the first video and through this video is very important for learning and very useful to show you and to help you understand the different layers and levels you can explore and analyze an individual, a journey, you know, etc., right? So finally, I just want to let you guys know that the method that I use with secondary progressions, as in a secondary progress chart, is a different method to the method that Solar Fire uses. Okay, you won't find this method on a program because it's a method that my mentor has created himself. Okay, we have been working with this method for many years, and it works. It's 100% accurate. Now, when you're talking about secondary progress planets, that doesn't come into it because the ratio of a planet moving is generally 1 degree equals 1 day. Okay, so when you're talking about all the planets except the moon, that's not really going to be neither here nor there. But when you're talking about the this is Novak's secondary progressed chart relative to the secondary progressed moon that is taking place basically around March this year. Okay, so these angles that you see here are 100% accurate, calculated to the time of when this new moon occurs, which is sometime in March. Okay, and you can see there that the secondary progressed moon is at 4 degrees. Okay, so if you are to do a secondary progress chart through Solar Fire, first of all, you're going to see different angles around the wheel of the chart. Different degrees on the angles. The vertex will be at a different degree, okay? And the moon will almost definitely be not only at a different degree, but several degrees difference relative to my method and relative to Solar Fire method. I have spoken about this a couple of years ago, so it's not that I'm speaking about this for the first time, but anyway. So, for example, The secondary progressed moon, when Novak was here just last week, relative to my method, remember I said it was at 1 degree of Cancer, okay, which placed it right on the descendant, okay? Now, here is the secondary progressed chart that solar fire, okay, will show you relative to the time when Novak was here, okay, just last week. So have a look at the position of the moon. So it's almost 8 degrees of Cancer. Now, in plain English, you can see the date there on the screen, 16th of January, okay? That's when the decision came out and he was deported. So this is a secondary progressed chart as solar fire would progress it through its method, okay? The position of the degrees of all the other planets, that is wherever the other planets are relative to their degree and sign, etc., that's not going to change. It's not going to be any different. But what is going to be different is the outer wheel, that is the angles and the intermediate house cusps, the vertex, okay, and the position of the moon, which is what I said just a few minutes ago. So given that the moon is nearly 8 degrees, well, for a start, what you need to remember with secondary progressed methods is 1 day equals 1 month relative to the moon. Sorry, what did I just say? I meant to say 1 degree rather. So disregard the previous comment. 1 degree in secondary progressions with the moon only, I'm talking about, the secondary progressed moon, 1 degree equals 1 month. So when you've got the moon at 8 degrees of Cancer, okay, in the month of January, all right, it's when it moves to 9 degrees, that'll be in February, okay, so a month later. So if that is correct, which it is, then what we see here is that the secondary progressed moon at 8 degrees, meaning it's how can I put this? My method shows the moon at 1 degree of Cancer, which showed us it's right on that Mars, it's right on that descendant, etc. That if we take solar fire's method, that would mean that the moon went past that angle and his Mars 7 months ago. Hopefully you understand what I'm saying. So the moon's already past those points that I clearly demonstrated have been activated as per the calculated method in solar fire, which is incorrect. So there you have it. Okay. Now, it's sometimes solar fire will get the secondary progressed moon only wrong by 1 or 2 degrees. So sometimes it can be fairly safe, but a lot of the times it's not. And so I suppose what you need to keep in mind then is if you are working with a secondary progressed moon, instead of being fixed in your own mind about what solar fire is showing you, I mean, you can be, that's entirely up to you what you do. But if you can connect with what I'm saying and at least allow your mind to have a question mark, well, is what she's saying correct? Given what I've demonstrated, it's pretty obvious. And this is, I can give you hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of examples. This is just one of them. So if this is correct, then you might want to think to yourself, okay, well, the position of the secondary progressed moon as per solar fire, it could be a few degrees out, which would mean that it's a few months out. Which to some people, that's, oh, who cares? Is that really a big deal? Well, I'll tell you what is a big deal. When you get the angles and the intermediate house cusps not accurate, that's a huge deal. Because if you're looking at the movement of planets moving over those angles, because planets move secondary progress or planets period move a lot slower as opposed to, well, let's just exclude the sun and the moon for a moment. Everything else moves much slower. In other words, you could get a secondary progressed ascendant where you think you've got, you know, Pluto on it at the moment, whether you're doing a double technique, that is looking at progressed Pluto to an angle, or you're looking at transiting Pluto coming over that progressed angle. Well, if the time, if you're using the method of solar fire, which doesn't calculate those angles correctly, it could be out by 6 degrees, 7 degrees, And when you're talking about planets coming to those angles, that could end up resulting in 4 or 5 years of inaccuracy. So it is a big deal, right? Anyway, I know that's very technical, and so you don't need to worry about that so much. And the purposes of today's video is really just to show you my method and the difference between my method and solar fire, and just how, you know, everything lights up in Novak's chart. Absolutely everything lights up. So this is the whole sign houses. Yeah, so there it is. I'll just leave that with you to to contemplate. And now, if you want to know about this method, I'm not teaching it at the moment. All right, it's not necessarily very easy to teach. And at the moment, I will, you know, at some stage in the near future, include it, you know, as part of my online course, which I'm still yet to put together. That is putting it together online. Many of you have heard me say this, and many of you are aware. Lots of other of you won't know this, but I am wanting to create an online course for people who are interested in learning with me. And you know, the aim would be to add this particular method in the course, but that would, so this is really advanced sort of astrology, if you like. It's very technical, and it's, in my experience, it's some people can get it very quickly. You just have to have the mind for it, as it were. If you're a seventh ray, that helps, because the seventh ray corresponds to being able to work like that with your mind. That's just another level of astrology relative to esoteric astrology. But yeah, anyway, look, it's future things, and it is all possible to teach and to give this to people. And I would like to, you know, in the future, but right now I'm just trying to survive on creating this material for you guys to watch, and you know, just giving readings and things like that. It seems like it's really difficult to be doing much more than that at the moment. You know, I'd need to probably take off, you know, a few months of all this sort of work, and just focus on my online course. And I'm just not in a position to do that at the moment. So, you know, in the future I will be, and I will be doing it. So hope you enjoyed that. I hope you've learned something new, and I'll be back very soon with some updates for Aquarius season and the nodes moving into Taurus and Scorpio. And again, hope you're all doing well, and see you soon. Much love and many blessings, and bye for now.